Hey there viewers, this time around I'm back again, as promised, with the process of the Illustrator portion of the bookmark design commission for Tale Foundry. If you haven't seen the first video in which I go over the process of sketching and doing all the heavy lifting portions of this design, there will be a link to it in the description, and I'll definitely recommend checking that out first if you haven't seen it already. So, to start with, when we left off in the previous video, we had just finished off a rough sketch of the overall visual look and layout of this piece. Now, we're just going to jump straight back into it and take what we previously had made already into Illustrator in order to finalize it. Now when I say finalize, essentially what we're going to be doing here is taking the sketch that we had made in Photoshop previously, we're bringing it into this program and just making everything much cleaner, smoother, and crisper. The previous sketch is just that, it's just a sketch, so there's like a lot of unevenness in the lines and a lot of sort of just rough edges and everything to it, and what this process does is essentially converts everything to very smooth, very sharp, finalized state. So we'll be reaching this really clean, finalized quality that we're looking for through the use of vectors. So for anyone who's not super familiar with Illustrator, which is the program that we're going to be working in here, Illustrator works entirely in vectors. All the shapes, all the lines, all the colors, all the gradients, all of pretty much everything that you do in Illustrator is done through vectors. By comparison, if you're working in Photoshop, Photoshop works entirely with pixels. The difference between the two is a pixel is just a small physical area of your screen essentially, and you're working with just tons and tons and tons of them in Photoshop in order to place visual elements on the screen. Whereas a vector graphic, instead of just being a tiny physical area in itself, they are mapped out. Vector graphics, are mapped out using mathematical equations which calculate where the edges of shapes sit in relation to one another. This means that when you work with vectors, you can be much more precise than you can be if you work with pixels, because there's pretty much no limitation to how small you can go with vectors, whereas with pixels, obviously you can only go as small as the size of one pixel. And on the other end of things, once you've created a vector design at whatever size that you worked on it at, the design can also be scaled up to a limitless amount. Like, you can upscale it as much as you desire, and there's no loss in quality or anything. And that is due to the mathematical nature of vectors, where they use equations and formulas and such in relation to one another to determine things. I'm not really going to try to pretend to understand all of the nuances of how vectors work exactly and the math behind them and everything. I just know what I need to know, which is they're real good for scaling things to different sizes, so they're very, very good in terms of like logo design, like banner design, anything that might need to be upscaled to a dramatically large amount. If you ever have any inkling that you might need to be doing that, then vectors are your way to go. They're also really good for extremely precise, very, very technical and detailed designs, such as this one. Now, getting into the work process itself, when you're working on something that is like really, really intricate and happens to be very symmetrical, like what we're working on here, it can save you a lot of time if you elect to just work on it one half at a time, pretty much. So essentially, Illustrator, to my knowledge, does not have a symmetry feature like what Photoshop had and what we were using in the last video in the sketch process. Illustrator does not have that feature to my knowledge, so essentially what we're doing is just working on that manually. So I chose essentially to just like make one half of the design at a time, and once that half was done, I would duplicate the entirety of what I had made, flip it horizontally, and then merge the two together, and then you essentially only need to spend the time on half the design. So it's like essentially half the time, probably more than half the time, because of all of the tweaking and finagling and everything that would be involved in trying to work on both sides individually and make them line up and look symmetrical. I've definitely been there and done that in my earlier days learning this program, but we've evolved beyond that now, so. But anyways, so when working in Illustrator and working on like any design really, but same applies to if it's like something super intricate or whatever like this, a very basic handy thing to keep in mind would be to just make everything, all of your forms, build them out of super basic shapes and lines. So it's just like sketching or drawing. You start with a large basic shape first, and then you build your forms from that. Once you've got the basic shape or the basic line, if you're trying to make like a curved line or something, once you've got that basic form that you're working with down, you can use any of the Illustrator's tools to edit it and make it conform to what you need it to do. So I'll start with like a basic shape, and then I'll use either I'll like unite shapes if I need like for the cylinder of the Tailbot's torso, it needs like a round bottom, and then like hard edges on the sides because it's sort of a cylindrical shape, and you're looking up at it from the bottom, so you're seeing like the bottom of the cylinder and the sort of rounded top edge of the cylinder as well. So that was like I think two ovals combined with a rectangle, which I use the shape builder and like unite path to build just from basic ellipses and rectangles. And the same goes for sort of complicated lines that are supposed to be outlining something. For example, I will take the line tool, or the pen tool, sorry, and just sort of quickly make a line that sort of very, very roughly conforms to the outline of what I'm trying to create outlines for. And once that rough outline is there, and once again it'll look very, very jagged and everything because I'm literally just placing a bunch of points. I'm not like using the pen tool to like adjust anchor points or anything or give it any sort of curve. I'm literally just plotting points and making sort of a jagged rough outline. Once that rough outline is there, a lot of times I'll just take the smooth tool and just go back over that line and just smooth it until the line bends and contorts the way that it's supposed to around what I'm trying to build it around. So I did that for the outline around Tailbot on the gear pattern and everything underneath him. And I also know that I'm using that technique pretty heavily in all of the intricate spirals and everything, like the negative space spirals that are carved into the area like underneath the Tailbot sort of flowing out of him. Those are essentially constructed with the spiral tool, but then I will have taken the pen tool and added like a little bit of additional length coming off of those spirals or whatever, which would just be, sort of a jagged line smoothed down with a smooth tool, and then combined with the path of the spiral. And then once those paths are combined, you can take the smooth tool and just like make the transition really, really, really smooth and easy to look at, and get rid of any of the jagged weirdness that sometimes results from joining paths. Now, I used to be super inclined to do everything in Illustrator custom and by hand without using any sort of shape tools or any sort of like pre-made like spirals or anything like that in Illustrator at all, and just do everything by hand from scratch. But as time has gone on, I've realized what a time sink that is and what little difference it generally makes in the end. So I just want to stress that it's like really, really pretty important to learn how to use everything that you can to save yourself time. So utilize all of the tools that Illustrator has, all the pre-made shape tools, all of the like the spiral tool, just any sort of tool that you possibly can that'll just make something for you that you don't have to make, and then just alter it with the other tools that are available to you to force what you have into the shape of what you want. This is starting to sound really overdramatic now. Bend the program to your will, control the shapes, do with them what you want. And if they do not comply, then find others who will and use them instead and dispose of the rest. Yeah, I mean, that is actually basically what we're doing here. So, teaching point. So, essentially, we're pretty close to the end here. All I really need to do is make some final adjustments, and I end up having to make some additional edits to the characters, and especially the Talebot itself, after showing it to the client for one of the drafts that I presented. The characters got slightly off model. That's another thing to be careful for, I guess, when you are vectorizing anything in Illustrator, like a sketch or anything. Just be very, very careful that you don't lose anything in translation, I guess, if that makes any sense. Sometimes the final vector, if you're not paying like super close attention, can differ from your initial sketch, and you lose some of the forms and shapes and everything in the transition. So I just have to make some edits going back to correct some of that happened, because it's really important that this character is on model and is looking the way that he's supposed to look according to their branding. So anyways, while I'm making those corrections, I just wanted to say this project was a whole lot of fun to work on. I love doing really intricate stuff like this, and I always like going back into Illustrator and kind of cracking my knuckles and getting back into it, because it's a program I don't really use a whole lot aside from for like logo design, etc. I don't do a lot of like super intricate illustration work in it often enough for my liking. So this was definitely a nice change of pace. Loved working on it, and I'll be looking forward to seeing these get printed out and seeing the final product and what they look like and everything. So once those do come out, if you guys want to give me a follow on like Twitter or well, I guess probably just Twitter, give me a follow on the old Twitter account. I'll be posting photos of the final outcome of this project when they all get printed, and I get photos to show. So yeah, check that out if you're interested, and I think I'm just gonna go ahead and let this video play out since we're nearly done, and let you guys enjoy the rest of the royalty-free and thematically fitting stock music that I've surely set to the background of this video. So for now, I will bid you adieu, and thank you for watching.